It's very good to see each one of you today. We have our college students, or a lot of our college students, home, and we're certainly glad to see them. We're proud of them, their growth and development, and glad to see them, especially this morning. It was enjoyable to watch as the young men were leading us in our worship. We've been looking in Titus at the unwrapping of God's great gift to mankind. We began with Titus chapter 2, verse 1 several weeks ago, talking about sound doctrine. As for you, Titus, speak the things which are fitting for sound doctrine. And then he goes on and begins to enumerate what sound doctrine is. It's not just what you believe, it's not just what you teach, but he made it amply clear to us that it's what you do. It's what you do. And so you find that when he begins to unfold the idea or the concept of grace, it's a powerful concept, because it tells us that the free gift has given us salvation, and we are overwhelmed by the grace, the gift that God has given to us. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men. And on Friday, as Marcus was telling me over the telephone about what had transpired in Connecticut, I was asking myself, where's the grace? Where's the grace? Why can something like this happen? I mean, it hasn't been that many months ago that the theater in Colorado was assaulted. It hasn't been too many years ago that we saw multiple high schools going through this. Why? Well, the bottom line is, it may just be that you had a young man whose chemicals in his body were so misaligned and misarranged that reality was not his, and he went and did what he did. Morgan Freeman yesterday said it was the media's fault. And I tend to agree to some degree. They glorify this stuff. I'll be honest with you, I have watched as little of it as I possibly could. Friday night when the special news programs came on, I turned it off. Sue said, "Are you going to let me watch the news?" And I said, "Yes, we'll watch the news." "Well, some of it's going to be there." "Yes, I know that." How much did the media get right to begin with? Zip. They didn't get anything right. They've been correcting their mistakes for 2 days. And you will know the name of the person who did this, but will you know the name of any victim and think about it and remember it? And we glorify that stuff. And it robs us of grace. Well, maybe he's got something to say there, Mr. Freeman, that it's the media's fault. But I would say to you, it's our fault. Wait a second, Robert, we had nothing to do with this. Oh? Have we allowed God to be taken out of our society? Yes. Oh, we sit here and give lip service to, yes, we believe in God, and yes, we trust in God, and yes, we want our society to be a godly society. Do we allow false religions that believe in hate to have predominance and preeminence? Yes. And that nullifies the grace of God and the power of God. We need to get down deep into our hearts and our souls and say, you know, What can we do to get people to have a God consciousness again? Because our God is not a God of hate. Our God is not a God of animosity and ill will. Our God teaches us to love, and our God teaches us to do that which is right and that which is merciful and that which is justifiable. That's where the grace is. Where's the grace? And ironically, our text that was already selected speaks to this point. And hopefully you and I will grab a hold of this point and we'll become more vocal in our stance for righteousness. Because we know that it's when the grace of God appeared bringing salvation that man suddenly had hope. It was not found in all of the trappings of this world and all of the things that happen around us. It's found when people have a God consciousness within them that says, I want to be responsive. I want to give my will into His hand, into His care, into His keeping. So let's look for the grace. We go back to this great verse 11. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men. But notice there's a comma there. And for the next few verses, Paul continues this sentence. And Paul, what would you tell us about the grace of God that has appeared? What would you tell us about that which has brought about this salvation? Well, the first thing Paul says to us, it teaches us. It teaches us. People, we have been trying to grab a hold of the mystical. We want something to just kind of float down out of heaven and begin to absorb our minds and our thoughts. And the truth of the matter is, if we want to have a God consciousness, we want grace to work in our lives, grace to work in our world's life, we're going to have to learn that it teaches us some things. It gives us some responsibility. It begs us to be responsive. People come in and talk to me pretty frequently and they say, Robert, I just don't understand. Christianity doesn't seem to be making the difference in my life that I want Christianity to make in my life. And my first question is, what are you doing? Huh? You mean I've got responsibility? You mean I've got to be receiving something and then putting it into action in my life? That's exactly what Paul is saying. Paul is saying that the grace of God has appeared and it's going to teach you something, folks. And when our society begins to get a God consciousness again, and when we as His church begin to rise up and tell people of the glorious news of Jesus Christ and Him crucified and make that God consciousness come to the very forefront, then we're going to start solving some of these problems that are so very, very difficult. Because the grace of God has taught us. Taught us. Well, Paul, what is grace going to teach us? The first thing that Paul says is it teaches us to deny ungodliness. Political correctness is just consuming us. I'm here to tell you that political correctness and us accepting the politically correct thing to say and do is going to bury our society. No one quotes Edward Gibbons anymore. Edward Gibbons wrote a 5-volume series, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. I used to have the entire set, but my sister took it from me. Gibbons lists 5 distinctive reasons why Rome fell as a society, as a culture, and as a ruling power. And would you believe that every single solitary thing that Gibbons said about Rome is true about America today? I don't know if that scares you, frightens you, but it frightens me. Because it tells me that we began to accept ungodliness. We began to accept the evil that is around us. Oh, what can I do about some of these issues? What can I do about some of these values that are contrary to the values that are listed here? Well, folks, we can stand up. We can speak up. We can not cower and be ashamed. And if we speak up enough, and if we get other people to speak up enough, and if what used to be called that silent majority begins to talk, what a difference it'll make. And when we quit tolerating evil and sinful actions, and we quit glorifying those things, we quit denying ungodliness, I'm telling you, things are going to change. Listen to the scriptures, Romans chapter 1, beginning verse 16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, Paul says. I'm not ashamed, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the righteous man shall live by faith. Powerful words. But then look at verse 18. He starts getting our attention there. He says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness. Get the point? What's God teaching us? He's teaching us first that we are to deny ungodliness and worldly lusts. I'm far closer to the end of my preaching life than I was at the beginning. Probably for the last year, I've been spending an awful lot of time in my private world thinking about what I have done. Have I done anything that has benefited the kingdom? Sometimes I sit there and I say, well, remember this person, this situation, that situation, you know. And then I look around at the congregation and I see us so captivated by worldly thinking. So captivated by what's going on in the here and the now that is so irrelevant in the ultimate eternal scheme of things. And I begin to wonder, how do you overcome culture? How do you get our kiddos to think godly instead of thinking popularly? How do you get us to not be so overwhelmed with, if we don't have this and we don't have that, we're really not the sort of person we ought to be? You see, it's all worldly lust, and that temptation, that allurement is there. And God says to us, grace is going to teach you to deny ungodliness, and it's going to teach you to deny worldly lust, to get them out of your system, away from you. You're going to live differently. So someone's going to say, hey, did you go see such and such movie? And you say, no, it has the wrong rating. I know it's going to be evil. I know it's going to say things that it shouldn't say and teach things it shouldn't teach, and I'm not going to pay for it. I haven't been to Cowboy Stadium, and I never plan to go. I don't want to give that man a single dollar. Period. You can, but I'm not. Because the worldliness there is killing our society. It's killing us, even in the church sometimes. Listen to Peter. 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 11. I urge you as aliens and strangers. I want to pause right there for a second. What are we here? What are we here? We're just here temporarily. We're not here for very long. We're just here for a little bit. You know, I can still remember when I was 10 years old. In fact, I can remember some things that happened when I was 3 years old. And it seems like it was day before yesterday. And I go to the hospital when babies are born, and I look at the parents, and one of the things that some of you will say, yes, Robert, you said that to me. You be watching and you be enjoying and you be taking care of every day, because day after tomorrow they're graduating from high school. And I had a parent that I'd said that to some 17 years ago come up to me the other day and say, Robert, you're right. Man, it's gone by fast. We're not a permanent fixture here upon this earth. God didn't intend that in the first place. And in our theology and our understanding of God and God's working in our life, we've got to be a people who understands that we are aliens here. We are strangers here. We're in preparation mode here for that which is to come. And there is nothing here to be compared with the glories of what is there. So we shouldn't resist this idea of being an alien and a stranger here, and that we're going to deny the worldly lusts. So we should abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. Are we really being that salt that we preached about? Are we really being that light that we preached about? Are we really living our lives with the Tabasco that we preached about? In denying the worldly lusts? I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It's hard. It's a battle that's fought minute by minute, day by day, hour by hour. But we've got to fight it. Listen carefully as John writes, 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, do not love the world, nor the things in the world, for if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. That's a scary passage to me. If I love the world, I don't love the Father. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. What about this world? Verse 17, the world is passing away, and also its lusts. But the one who does the will of God lives forever. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, teaching us to deny ungodliness and worldly lusts, and that we should live sensibly in this world. That's where part of the culture that we live is creating such great difficulty for us, because it is an artificial world. I have heard of people who got so enmeshed in their avatars. I'm not sure I know what that is. And if you don't, ask some of the younger people, they'll tell you and give you a very good explanation. That they actually thought the avatar was real. It was a person they had created. I'll never forget the true story of the woman who came into ladies' Bible class one time and asked for a certain person to be prayed for. And someone said, who in the world is that? And said, oh, they're dying on days of our lives. Yeah, it happened. Talk about unreal. Talk about that which is thwarted. We should live sensibly. What does that mean? Well, Mr. Thayer says it means with sound mind. It means with some common sense. It means that we live taking these words and letting them rule in our hearts and our minds, so that our thinking is shaped in a different way, not in the way that we are so often compelled to think. Live sensibly. So the question is, what is the mind being fed? What is your mind being fed? I'm fixing to get in trouble, but I've got to say this. I believe that one of the things that's causing such great difficulty, and there seems to be some sociological studies that are agreeing with me, in our society is computer games. violent battles being fought in unreality that is warping the mind. I don't know what caused that young man to do what he did. Like I say, it may be that he just was totally disarranged. But the tragedy and the havoc and the evil that he perpetuated upon that community and upon those parents and upon those husbands and wives and grandparents is beyond my ability to comprehend. I pray for them. I know that those children are safe in the arms of Jesus. But I wonder, even if he was a little bit deranged, what was being fed in his mind? What was he spending all of his time concentrating on? The culture around us is deadly, absolutely deadly. That's why I say to you, let's be careful what we feed the mind. How much time do you spend meditating, thinking, reading this? How much time do you spend in thinking about positive, proper things, right things, godly things? How much time do you spend in Christian service? Hopefully every minute of every hour of every day. You're living for Jesus. You don't want to be like the fella that I was visiting with some years ago, and he says, well, every now and then I lower myself just a little bit. No, as a Christian, we don't ever intentionally lower ourselves. We keep walking in the light because the grace of God has appeared, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should be living sensibly, and we feed our minds those things which will allow us to live sensibly in this world. And secondly, he says, not only sensibly, but righteously. The word righteously comes from the root word right. Contrary to what is being said in our culture, there is a standard of absolute right and there is an absolute wrong, and it's well defined. You can know the truth, and the truth can set you free. Do not allow this world to continue to say to you that there are gray areas in God's ethics, in God's morals, in God's values, in God's commandments, in God's desire for our life and design for our life. There is absolute right. It's called righteousness. The Old Testament brings it out clearly to us as it talks to us about God's righteousness working in our lives. Look at some of these verses. Psalm 106 and verse 3. How blessed are those who keep justice, who practice righteousness at all times. There's a blessing there. There's a power there. There's a strength there. There's a courage there. Why? Because I choose to do what is right, not what's convenient. I don't allow situation ethics to rule me. I do what is God's will, not man's will. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 28. In the way of righteousness is life. In the way of righteousness is life. Hosea chapter 14 and verse 9, for the ways of the Lord are right, and the righteous will walk in them. We want to walk in the way of the Lord. So not only do we deny ungodliness and worldly lusts and live sensibly and righteously, but that last word, godly, it's one of the few times that this word is used speaking about God in the New Testament. What does it mean to be godly? Well, it's God-likeness within us. God-likeness in which I try to emulate the justice, the mercy, the love, the equability of our God. I look at God and I can't be powerful like Him, but I can demonstrate His characters, His qualities. What does Paul say? Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. And if you wanted to take that passage a little further, as Christ is the image of God. Colossians chapter 1, verse 15 tells us. Living in His image. Is God arrogant? No. I see no arrogance in God. In all the qualities that we see of God, God humbly serves that which is His creation. Challenge you this week to read the book of Deuteronomy, and I want you to find the 19 or 20 different characteristics of God that are listed in the book of Deuteronomy. What are you going to discover about God? That it's the way of righteousness, and the way of righteousness is the way that we are to live, and the way that we live makes the difference in this world. And when we live righteously and we challenge others to live righteously and have a God focus, a God conscience, a godliness about them, a God likeness, we will not nullify all of the forces of Satan and all of the powers that Satan exerts upon human beings, but we will limit it. I believe that with all of my heart. That we will cause this world to be changed and changed into His likeness and find true freedom in His truths. God likeness. Paul speaks to this point in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 24, and put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. Truth be known, we may not be able to change everything that goes on in our world. But as we see it escalating, I say something's got to happen, folks. I'd like to blame guns, but you can't blame guns because a gun doesn't work if it doesn't have a trigger pulled. I'd like to blame the media. I think the media needs to be horsewhipped. You can quote me. I don't care. I believe they need to rethink the way in which they do things in our society. They're feeding the kitty that takes us further and further away from God and righteousness. I'd like to blame whatever, but the root cause is a lack of godliness. It's a lack of the awareness of God's grace. And when we get God's grace teaching us to deny ungodliness and worldly lust and to live sensibly and righteously and godly in this world, we're going to change things. Not completely, but we're going to change things. We need to be standing up for Jesus. We need to determine we're going to become God's person in this world and let the grace of God shine through us. The invitation song is there. What will you do with Jesus? That's the question you have to ask and answer this morning. We extend the invitation of Christ. Maybe there's someone here who's never become a Christian, and you need to be immersed into Jesus for the forgiveness of your sins so that you can be raised to walk in newness of life. A few moments ago, I was thankful that those little children were safe in the arms of Jesus, but I worry about the adults whose lives were taken. Were they right with God? You see, I want, as God wants, as Paul wants, all men to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. You need to become Christ this morning, to be immersed with Him in the watery grave, to be raised to walk in newness. Maybe this morning, as a Christian, you haven't been living as you ought to live, and you need to accept God's grace, and you need to be taught by God's grace to live a godly life, to get rid and to fight against the worldly lusts that are there, and to live soberly and righteously and godly in this world. If we can help you this morning in any way, we sing this song of encouragement. We're going to stand and sing. If you need to come, would you, while we stand, while we sing.